Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Kofefi. I'm Carter Laren, and I'm joined, as always, by the bad mama jamma, Keri Smith.
Good morning, Carter.
How you doing today? It's Friday.
It's Friday. Today's the Red Poppy Festival in Texas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are red poppies, do they have any opioid effects?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but they're really beautiful.
Okay.
And they've already closed down the streets. Yeah.
By the way, I think I didn't tell you this, Keri. We need to shout out to Keith. Keith, I never thought I would say this to another man, but you make me want to have a better Patreon. We have a Patreon, another Patreon subscriber or whatever supporter.
Oh, we do?
Yeah. Keith signed up, but I realized that I haven't updated Patreon in like months. It's just there. But like,
yeah, we should update it. Even though
the
we're
content
not
sucks, so we need to. Yeah, we will take an action item to make Patreon better for those of you who want to support us on Patreon, and maybe we'll think of something to throw in that's extra on Patreon, because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be nice to people who support you.
Well, thank you,
which
Keith.
we intend to be. We just haven't. So, yeah. So thank you, Keith. Also, it's Follow Friday, so just tweet at all your friends and put unsafe space in the Follow Friday, and that way we'll get more Twitter followers, so we can lose them when we get banned. Keri, what do you want to talk about today?
I just read an article. It may not be of interest to other people, but it really gave me shivers in the New York Times. So this goes to that issue that I'm really fascinated about, and I want to do an episode about Deprogrammed at some point about the SJW ideology encroaching into churches.
Oh yeah.
There is a article in the New York Times from a few days ago. It's titled "Can Black Evangelicals Save the Whole Movement?" But when you get into the meat of it, you've got this. It kind of focuses on this one theology professor who's basically bringing critical race theory, intersectionality, all the stuff that's a part of what we call SJW ideology into churches. And he even openly admires and says that everything he's teaching them is based on the work of this self-avowed Marxist, and that he doesn't mention, who's that guy? Dr. Cohn. That he doesn't mention Cohn's name because he doesn't want to put them off. And this was the most chilling sentence to me. Or, here it goes. I get in the back door. He said that.
Yeah. Well, look, imagine you could harness the power and excitement of evangelicals and turn them to your cause. You'd be a force of nature, because evangelicals are pretty committed and they got a lot of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, he's talking about how he gets them. He uses the concept of sin and redemption to get them to introduce the concept of systemic injustice. Quote, before they know it, they're nodding their heads. They're agreeing. And it's just, I don't know. I think you told me if you listen, people will tell you what they're about. And that one sentence, I get in the back door, I was like, oh gosh.
Yeah, no, they do often. That's been my experience also, is just like when you meet people often at the beginning of your relationship, they actually tell you straight up what's going on. You're just not listening half the time. At least that's by my ex-girlfriend experience has been. Hey, I look back and go, oh yeah, she was pretty clear about the kind of person she was.
Language is very revealing. I know we've talked about this before, but just for people who maybe didn't see it, that when Jussie Smollett thing was happening, he said at one point in an interview, before we knew it was all a lie, but some of us thought it was a lie, he said, if I had said it was Mexican men, this wouldn't have happened. If people wouldn't react. If I had said it was, and I'm like, wait a minute, shouldn't
you mean if it was?
If it had been Mexican men, like there's that little trick of the language right there tells you if I had said it was Mexican men versus if it had been Mexican men. People reveal a lot with their language when they're being.
They really do. They really do. I can't help it.
Yeah.
Well, that's depressing, I guess.
Well, it is. It's also, it's really, it's interesting to me because I am a new Christian, and it's it's the cross section of everything. That it's like the ideology I came from, and infiltrating into what I view as actually a redemptive belief system that's based around individuals being like having a personal relationship with God and being individual under the eyes of God, being individuals, and it's taking that and it's putting something above that, above the Bible, above the Word of God. So the primary text and the primary thing that the lens through which you're looking at the world is a Marxist lens instead of a Christ-centered lens. And that just really, so I don't know, either people may not be interested in this. We might have a really great guest at one point. We're trying to get this one guest who I really love his writing. If you guys want to look him up, his name is Samuel Say, S-E-Y. But anyway, that's enough about my pet.
No, I get it. And look, I think collectivism is one of the fundamental beliefs of the intersectional and social justice movement. You can't have the rest of their belief system without collectivist mentality. And so it will undermine anything that has an individualist principles. If you get convergence, then one of the things they have to do is get rid of the individualism, right? Because individualism is incompatible, right? An individualist says, well, I didn't own slaves and you were not a slave and I didn't do XYZ and you haven't done XYZ. Like an individualist looks at things, from a personal responsibility. They don't care about what their ancestors have done or what members of groups they're in or whatever. But that's not compatible with intersectionality and social justice. So individualism's got to go.
Yeah, and even within this New York Times article, this professor who's getting in the back door at churches, he says at some point, the point is getting people to accept that there needs to be and I'm not reading a quote here, but I can't find it. But the point is basically to get people to accept that there needs to be a redistribution of power.
Right.
That's all SJW. It's like everything is through, just a real brief refresher, it's like through a lens of, you view the world through a lens of power, and they define power not based on your individual ability to do anything or make a change or inflict force. They base it on what identity groups you're in. And so when you're saying there needs to be a redistribution of power, like with Marxism, you're talking about we need to enact certain rules or certain legislation perhaps, or so that we can elevate some groups on the basis of race or sex and put others down. That goes against every non-racist principle and non-sexist principle. So because you're actively judging people by their race and sex and saying, let's move anyway.
Yeah, I don't think that we've made this point clear. It's clear to me, but I don't know that we've articulated it. Absolutely, intersectionalism and social justice is a philosophical and cultural movement, but it's a cultural movement with intent. The end goal is political power. All of this stuff, they're not just hoping that this stuff gets enforced with social mores. Their end goal is political power. They just are smart enough to realize that culture needs to happen first. So that's all that's happening. And one of the things that I view, when we talk about this culture war, the West, if you think about the government as the gun in the room, right? The gun that's allowed to be in the room, that can be pointed at people to make them do things, right? That's fundamentally what the government is. It's the gun in the room. The West has kind of been about making that gun smaller and, less gun in the room. And the social justice movement is about like seizing the gun. That's all. That's what they're
Carter,
about. That's the other
analogy. Side. That's a great analogy. I love that. It's exactly what it is. Seizing the gun, and a really big gun at that.
Right. Yeah. So that's why we need to fight them. By the way, I wanted to mention, so yesterday we talked about the feminist coffee shop and, we got a couple people that didn't like, probably people that followed us after Megan Murphy that were feminists who were pissed off that I dissed feminism. And one of the people was just, yelled and left. Okay, fine. That's not an argument. But someone actually brought up an argument, and I want to address it because it was a good point. And I think she made a good point. She said, well, women are majority workers in sweatshops. And I think that's true. I think it's, so I looked up some stuff I haven't finished reading it because it's early in the morning and I just saw her comment this morning, but this is predominantly in developing worlds. We don't have a lot of sweatshops in the U.S. I mean, there's some, but it's mostly in the developing worlds. And it appears to be that, yeah, like women are predominantly the majority of sweatshop workers around the world. And yeah, you want to go fight sweatshops around the world and for women's rights, have at it. So I guess the point I want to make about that is she said something about like, oh, people can get away with paying them less and treating them worse. I think that removes agency. And I want to make a point about sweatshops generally. So I will agree that, like, yes, that's a case we didn't bring up, like around the world in non-developed nations or developing nations. Perhaps most of the sweatshop workers are women, and sweatshops are not an environment in which we in the first world think is a kind of place we'd want to work. It's there's a lot of harsh conditions. It's bad. And so I get that. I also think it removes agency to say, well, they're forced to work in them. I mean, unless they're being rounded up physically by force, they're not being forced to work in sweatshops. And the reason that this, I always want to quickly mention this is people use this argument against sweatshops generally, and they use it against China. And you hear this argument about like Foxconn, for example, right? How horrible it is to work for Foxconn and blah blah blah, and Chinese sweatshops. And I'm gonna pull the race card out. My wife is Chinese. She grew up in Shenzhen, and she actually got into an argument with Sergey Brin's girlfriend on stage a while ago about this very thing, because Sergey Brin's one of the founders of Google, and Sergey Brin's girlfriend was arguing that sweatshops are horrible and we need to do something about it and blah 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 blah. And my wife was saying, you have no clue what it's like to be in China. People are working at the sweatshops because it's better than the life they had before they were working at the sweatshops. When you are dying and your life is absolute crap in like the rural parts of China, and you have an opportunity to move to a big city and work long hours in a crappy sweatshop, and for what seems like not a lot of pay, that's a step up. You are happy. It is a step in the right direction. So to vilify these sweatshop owners and like, you have to pay them more, if they don't, the people that are there are happy to have the jobs, and those jobs are a step up. And you have to realize that all of this is a transition from a third world nation to a first world nation, and that transition takes time, and it takes time to exhaust the peasant labor force to the point where they can start demanding better wages and increased better living conditions. But
that's the ultimate end goal. You share that goal with people who want that. It's just
everyone wants that, but you don't want it by force. It's not the shop owner's fault. I mean, look, in the cases where the person is like physically enslaving people, then yes, it's their fault. But in general, like offering someone an opportunity, like if I start a shop tomorrow and I say it's a crappy place to work, I'm not going to pay you much, the pipes are leaky, there's like, here's are all the horrible things about working here. Do you want to work here?
By the way, that applies to us here. If we need an intern. Go ahead.
Right. Yes. Yeah. This is a crappy place to work. We can't pay you anything. Do you want to work here? And if the answer is yes, that's on the person who said yes, and you're denying them agency. And whenever you get on this kind of bandwagon of like, these sweatshop people are oppressed, you have to understand, you have to compare it to their previous life, and you have to give them agency. You have to ask them if they're oppressed. You can't just be like, well, by first world standards, this sucks. Yeah.
Well, I have a question for you.
What?
If you don't think, because you said that she mentioned it's mostly women who are in the sweatshops, which is a great point. Why do you think it's mostly women?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I imagine perhaps that in a lot of these countries, well, I don't know what countries they're talking about, so I don't necessarily want to speculate. But
you don't have to have an answer. I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of speculation I could have about maybe it's like a supplementary thing, like maybe the hours make it so that women, maybe they can bring their kids and have them around. I don't know. maybe they're agriculture-based economies and the guys are out in the field. I don't really know. I don't know the answer to this. So
That's a good,
I
interesting
haven't
question.
researched, so I shouldn't speculate. I don't know, but it's worth looking into. And if someone wants to like point us to stuff about this plight, like,
that
I'm
either
open to hearing about this plight. We were specifically talking about the first world when we were making fun of the Seattle or wherever that was, the coffee shop. So it's not really super relevant to the first world, but sure.
it's still interesting though.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. Sure,
Yeah.
And look, I would be much more tolerant of a lot of the feminists if they were running around the globe, trying to fight the worst examples of misogyny and patriarchy they found. But you know who's doing that? Women like Christina Hoff Sommers, who the radical feminists call a men's rights activist. So, it's kind of rich to be complaining about a non-existent pay gap in a first world country when you're getting stoned to death for adultery in Brunei or wherever it is. And you're not making a peep against, a massively patriarchal and misogynist culture.
To be clear, a lot, and somebody said this in the comments, a lot of radical feminists are. It's
Great.
just radical feminists don't, like Megan Murphy, they don't own the conversation right now. They don't own feminism anymore because SJW feminists, third wave feminists, these intersectional feminists have taken that away, and they purport to speak for all of feminism. And they call radical feminists TERFs. They actively have created a slur for them. And so they don't dominate that conversation right now. It's just like with everything else, this SJW ideology has swallowed it up. I feel like there are all these different movements that this ideology is really good at just going in and taking them over and amassing and making it a big part of itself.
Yeah. That's
like
fair.
You said with the Christian church. Yeah. That's a great example. Oh my gosh. So it's like they move into these movements. You've got people who are the personality type to be in a movement anyway, and they're activists already. And then you seed your ideology there and tie it into what they believe in already. And then you've got these mouthpieces that go out into the world, and you're right, they are doing it in the church. It's so interesting. Anyway.
By the way, that's a great point, by the way, about the feminists. Like, that's a good point. And maybe we should have Megan back on to talk about some of this stuff, because I don't really know a lot about the rad femmes.
Yeah, what would be fun is maybe on Deprogrammed at some point, because it's a long format. We have a radical feminist and a liberal feminist on, or just to sort of talk about the differences.
Yeah. I just as an atheist, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Which door does Satan use?
Well, that line just really, I get in the back door, just really stuck with me, because it's like saying, like, I sneak in when you're not looking, I sneak this ideology in, and there is a verse in the Bible about how sin is like a cat that crouches at your door and can strike at any moment. I mean, honestly, I think it could come in the front or the back door. I actually just had a really weird interaction with a Christian, I guess you would say Christian leader, that I guess I know there are people who use, just like in any movement, there are people who are there with bad intent. I mean, look, there's Catholic priests who molest kids. I mean, there's bad people who in Christianity who are using it to cloak bad intent. But it still shocked me. This is my first person I came into contact with, and I was like, oh my gosh, the guy's a creep. but how could he be? He's like, anyway. That
they're all over the place, Keri.
I know. I guess I'm like a naive. I guess I regained my naivete in some ways, because I've had such a good experience with the church that I found, and the Christians that really challenged all the stereotypes that I had had about Christians. And these are people who are trying to be close to Jesus and live the way that Jesus has commanded, and they're not in it. I don't think of it as, a lot of times people separate organized religion from like a relationship with God. I view it that way. Like this isn't all the stereotypes I had about people using religion to push something else, or to to try and virtue signal.
Yeah.
And then to then run into someone who I feel like is a huge fraud. I'm like, oh, wait, what?
See, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. I think this happens whenever anyone switches major belief systems. Because the example I'll use is I was a Christian, and when I became an atheist, I went into this period of naivete, which took a while to get out of, where I was like, all atheists are rational, and
Yeah.
like, oh, they're Marxist crazy people. Oh, that's
There are
really
bad people in
disappointing.
any movement, man.
Like,
Yeah.
in fact, in atheism, it's most of them are Marxist crazy people. So it's like, oh, yeah, like I think I'm still right about my conclusions, but I can't make any positive assumptions about you just because you say you're an atheist. That's certainly
Right.
not true.
And that's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. There's one piece of news I feel like we should at least mention, because Trump is going to brag. Oh, I'm sure he's bragging about it already. The GDP is up by 3.2% in the first quarter of 2019. Yay! It's a big GDP jump. I know that economics bores you, Keri, but
Can you see my eyes glazing over?
I
This
know,
is why women shouldn't be able to vote. I really do. I'm kidding. It's a total joke.
I'm getting Megan Murphy back for that discussion.
I'm joking. But yeah, I'm like, economics. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I just want to look. I'm going to point something out. I hate this GDP. GDP is the biggest farce, and frankly, the way that we measure our growth is causing problems. And I don't think people think about this at all, because they take so-called experts. They take their opinions and they assume that because GDP is the number that the government uses, that there's some real value behind it. But I just want to break it apart a little bit. There's 4 components to GDP that they measure, right? Personal consumption, business investment, which is when businesses buy like new capital goods, not when they replace old ones, but they like buy new things, government spending, and net exports. Now, let's just talk about I'll make this quick. I know it's a Kofefi talk time, so it won't be long. Look, if you want to think about how productive a society is, right, you should be measuring their productivity, maybe the excess capital they have that goes into savings. You should be dinging them for debt. Or so when they're borrowing to do things that's borrowing from the future, that should be a strike against that society. If you start to think about like, how do we measure what's going on in the economy? Well, let's say I suddenly need to borrow money to pay for groceries, that should be a strike against the economy. That should be like, oh, things aren't going well. He had to go into credit card debt to buy groceries, right?
Okay.
But that's not how our GDP works. If you'll notice, personal consumption, business investment, government spending, net exports, none of those care about how much debt we went in to do any of that. So first of all, let's take down the easiest one, government spending. So every dollar that the government spends, they've either taxed or printed. So taxation is theft. And we don't have to talk about it morally. It's at least, even if you don't agree that it's morally theft, it's theft from the productive economy. The government doesn't produce anything. They don't add value to the economy. They take money away and manage. You don't get a new widget because of the government. They don't produce anything fundamentally. They take the product of someone's labor and redistribute it somehow. And they say, okay, well, thanks for doing X, Y, and Z. We're gonna give it to some other guy so he can build us a tank.
You may not get a widget, but you get a highway so that your trucks.
No, you don't get a highway.
I mean,
you get a subcontractor who can build the highway without the government, and you get some money taken away from bureaucrats. So you have to find the subcontractor. You don't get a highway. The government doesn't build roads. The government doesn't do anything. You think there were roads before the government? How do you think they got to? I mean, look, there were roads in 1776 before there were roads, right? So the government doesn't build anything. Like, think about it this way. When they start off, they have $0. The only way they get any dollars is by taking from other people. Now they can spend those dollars on doing things, even if congressmen gave them a shovel and they actually did go dig ditches and build roads, and government was literally doing something. the resources to do that didn't come from the government. The only resources the government have come from the private industry's production, private people. They come from your work. That's where the government gets resources. Resources aren't magically, money doesn't magically appear in government coffers, unless we talk about printing money, which is the second issue we talk about. So everything the government has comes from the economy, right? It's a negative. Zero government, better economy. It's a negative. Anything the government, anything they take, any dollar they spend came from the economy, and they probably wasted half of it shuffling paper in Washington before they dished it back out to someone who's going to do productive labor. So there's that. They also do inflation, which is printing money, right? They also print money, which causes inflation, I should say. I also just print money. Printing money is not a productive activity. So government spending shouldn't be a measure of any kind of health of an economy. That's just a backwards, retarded thing. In fact, it's a ding on the economy. How much money are they taking out? That's not a good thing. And most government spending is subsidized largely by debt, which our grandchildren and our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to have to pay. So that's not that's horrible. That's a horrible measure of anything. So that one's dumb. Personal consumption. So if I go into debt to buy a new TV, that helps the GDP. What the hell is that measuring? How is that measuring health of an economy? Right? Business investment, you could argue maybe, okay, they're making investments and stuff. So, but all of this is based on, and this is why I wanted to bring it up. All this is based on consumption as the measure of value. And I want to get, and I'm not the first person by far to talk about this. The whole Austrian School of Economics is about what I'm about to say. And there's plenty of economists like Peter Schiff and people who will talk about this, and Jim Rickards, I think, talks about this as well. Production, the Austrian School of Economics is this is kind of what it's based on. Sort of, it's production that's valuable, not consumption. Right. So most of the economists are based on Keynesian economics, which is really about consumption. So, and these are the government economists and the people running the show, right? Consumption isn't a measure of how well we're doing, guys. This is why Social Security is going to die. This is why the government's in trillions of dollars of debt. This is why consumer debt is high. Consumption is not a good measuring stick for an economy. Measuring consumption is like measuring how high you are from the cocaine you're taking. Right? Okay, that's great, but you're gonna fucking crash. You are going to crash. Maybe heroin's a better example. Gee, how high can I get from heroin? Look at how much heroin I injected into my veins this quarter. That's great. But when you go through withdrawal, it's gonna be fucking hell. And it's better to measure how much we're producing. Right? How much are people earning? How much are they saving? That would be a great measurement. Wow, how much are they saving? How much do I not have to go into debt to buy my groceries? How much do I not have to go into debt to buy a TV? Oh, look, I've got extra money. That's the sign of a healthy economy. And people have this idea that when you save money, you throw it in a bank and it's a waste of money because it's sitting in a bank. That's not how banking works. It's not a waste of money at all. That's what fuels the economy. That bank lends that money out at 10x what it is in your bank so other people can start businesses and grow the economy. All of that activity is way more valuable to measure in terms of the health of an economy. So, Trump and the Republicans, whenever the number goes up, right? Whenever the number is, quote, good, you have the side that's in power take credit for it. GDP is awesome. It's because Trump is such a genius with economics, blah, 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 right? Okay, fine. And when it goes down, the other side will yell, haha, Trump's an idiot with economics. It goes down. They're all idiots. This is not how to measure the health of an economy. It's the wrong way to measure the health of an economy. And I think we need to be really aware of that so we don't get caught up in the GDP hype. It's why I don't usually talk about stuff like GDP, because it's all hype and it's actually not a healthy measurement of anything. It's a measurement of how high we are on heroin.
I like when you use analogies. If you're going to speak to me about economics, use some drug and other use any kind of analogy. What I'm hearing from you is that I don't need to care about GDP.
Right.
Okay, good. Because I don't.
Yeah. So that whole rant was just don't listen to it. I guess.
Okay, good. No, I did learn something there.
I just can't help but ranting. It's Friday and I needed to rant. Sorry.
It's a good rant.
Yeah. So I feel like I derailed our conversation, but it's,
No, you didn't.
Anything else, Keri? Give us some Friday excitement, some Friday inspiration for the weekend.
Oh man, I don't know. I wish you all had a Red Poppy Festival to go to.
There we go. On that note, thank you everyone for watching. We hope that you have a Red Poppy Festival to go to somewhere in your town. Follow us, please, on Twitter at unsafespace, and it's Follow Friday, so tell your friends to follow us. Go to unsafespace.com, and you could be the next Patreon supporter or Bitcoin supporter or whatever you want if you go there. But whatever you do, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Unsafe Space. Comment on it. Bring up arguments that you disagree with. We'll be happy to continue to have discussions if there's data and evidence that contradicts what we're saying. So
we're happy to have people disagree. So.
Yeah, so I appreciate actually the person who pointed out the sweatshops, and we'll investigate it more and maybe have more discussions about it. So thanks everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.